Good morning. Today I am going to speak about the national and state level fiscal position in the Indian context, especially when we speak about the subnational level as well, not only the Indian context but also the subnational level. This is also a part of the lecture which we had already been conceived or had in our earlier in continuation of our earlier lectures, such as the fiscal aspect and its theoretical framework, along with the federal structure and importance of federalism, etc. So, as part of your modules or the exercise, you also have in the sixth module that a discussion on India's fiscal position, India's debt position, etc., and along with the state level fiscal positions. So this lecture largely, therefore, in continuation with our earlier lectures on the fiscal structure, and also newly discuss about particular aspects of the revenue, fiscal, primary, then debt management, etc., all other things. Now we have, as I said, the lecture is largely going to be talking about fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, primary deficit of the national level as well as the subnational. Let us look into the aspect of it. Now, normally everyone knows that the fiscal position of the country had a very bad record. This was the beginning point where many people had start speaking about the reforms of the fiscal conditions, reforms in the fiscal prudence matter, and successfully the legislation of FRBM, that is Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, was being implemented in the country since 2004. Okay, and the act was came into power in 2003, but the implementing year was started by 2004 onwards. So, and now we had almost finished 15 years of FRBM, and we want to actually look into what are the positions involved in that context, where our fiscal deficit and how it has been basically worked. Now, if you look into this diagram, this graph. Basically, this is actually the different years fiscal revenue and primary deficit in the country, and this is a standard government data set. Okay, look at the fiscal deficit of India. Now, in 1991, our fiscal deficit was roughly 3.5%. Okay, but now, even after the implementation of FRBM Act of 2004, our position is more or less, same, like 3%. So this rule-based fiscal stability indication, or kind of a regulatory framework, if we look into this diagram, hadn't much influence on the position, because see, look at the period where the fiscal deficit had gone up only during the 97 to 98 period, and it lasted till 2004, when we introduced the fiscal reform, that is the FRB, rule based management act, was being enacted. See, at that time it was all 4.5%. So the economists as well as the planners, those who argued for the rule based regulation, they were basically introduced this thing and legislated this rule based regulation but they brought down the fiscal deficit from a rate of 4.5% to roughly 1.9% on an average uh, in the proportion of the GDP. Okay, now this is proportion of the GDP. Now, then we can actually see that there is also an increase from 7 8 to 10 11, and sorry, 9 10, and then again it fallen, and again it is slightly from 2011 12 onwards. The budget, sorry, the GDP, gross state domestic products, this is a combined figure of all the states. Okay, GSDP percentage of a fiscal deficit started increasing from 2% to almost 17 18 period, around what you can see 3.5%, which is the original position of 1991. See, and again a small fall we can see in the subsequent year, where all of you know that there are a little bit reform, this what you call demonetization, post demonetization period. All this is very very critical, but I'll come to all that later. So this is actually the graph which says that there is an ups and downs. Even after you introduce the rule based thing, things can go up and down. So why this is happening? Because we are living in a world of uncertainty, and we are also living in a world of different kinds of needs and reforms, unforeseen incidents, like now during the time of pandemic. This is quite obvious that even you don't want to back out from the investment, or a sort of an intervention in the economy, but you can't do it because of the pandemic. So all kinds of this problem is being reflected. Over a period of 30 years, if you look into the fiscal position, then this is actually the kind of trend we can see. Same the case with the primary deficit also. See, look at the primary deficit. It was almost like 1.8% of the GSDP of all the state combined, and that is also having the same sort of a swing, and then it has also had a fall, then it is again gone up, and now all this is actually in tune with the fiscal deficit also. Now if you look into the revenue deficit aspect, things are more or less again it goes in the same direction in that sense. So the revenue and primary deficit together forms the fiscal deficit. So it is in consonance, but there are slightly different positions. For example, the revenue deficit of the combined state was even greater than actually the primary deficit of the states combined. So say in some points, for example, it was almost same during it. The revenue deficit was less than the primary deficit in the early 90s, but it started go together, and then the primary revenue deficit started increasing when you compare with the primary deficit. Even when we introduced the rule based one, the primary revenue deficit was greater than the primary deficit. Now because of the concerted effort due to the rule based fiscal policy, that is the mobilization fund mobilization spending, this was actually matched. That is, primary deficit has increased, whereas the revenue deficit actually came less than this thing, because the target is actually 0%. Now during this period, the primary deficit and the revenue deficit of the state in 2006-7 is surprisingly become zero. This is state combined, but at the same time, the fiscal deficit is remained as a positive one. Then that means there are other aspects which is always plays a very crucial role in the deficit, such as the spending of the backlog money which had borrowed, etc. So it has actually a long-term effect, and that will be reflecting in it. So in my mind, this revenue fiscal deficit of targeting it into 3 point something or 3% is in fact a kind of prudence which people were talking about, especially through the FRBM. We are trying to say that we cannot actually have more than 3% or 3.5%. That is, but at least from the data, it is quite clear that at least from the GSTP's perspective, this is almost less than, or because of some uneven years like this 97 to 2003 4, that is during that period it is quite interesting that India had a lot of turmoil, because the international 2097, the international crisis is very important. The Asian tigers were fallen, so it had in fact affected a lot. For that, in order to curb India slipping into that sort of a trap of an international turmoil, the domestic spending in fact had gone up. So that is why your revenue deficit had gone up, basically, because the government started spending in order to stabilize the economy. I don't think that there is a serious problem unless those people are only looking into the data. But if you look really into the current running of an economy, nobody is going to basically say that there is a problem when you are at a verge of collapse and you intervene, you get money from different sources. Naturally your deficit will go up, and that will be reflective now. But what you are doing is actually you are curtailing or stalling a crash, and that in fact makes your economy strength more positive. And that is why this is very important, because in 2007-8 again the same trajectory being followed, but not at that level, because that is why many economies in the post crisis of the post basically the and important thing has to be noticed, because in 2000 you have also a dot-com bubble burst in the United States, and in 97 you also had a lot of trouble, 97-98, in the East Asia, which is one of your trade ally. So again, in the United States is also, on the other hand, is one of the big allies, especially trade partner as far as India is concerned. So all this is in fact made the economy spending a little bit higher, and that increases the deficit, and of course from the past deficit and its payback in terms of income, that is also increases the deficit. Again, we have to keep in mind that when we borrow money, we have to repay back, not only in terms of the interest rate, but also when you have a threat of a devaluation or currency depreciation, then what you have to do is actually your payback amount would be higher. If a payback amount is higher, slightly higher, then that will be reflecting into your deficit. So this is what is in fact we can see in the whole understanding of a positive higher fiscal deficit with that of the GSTP ratio. Now I think most of the people were very much worried about your GSTP and the deficit ratio if it goes beyond 3%. Now see, when you have, I would say that there is actually unnecessary, but many people say there are different views. But when the state is having a trouble, there is nothing wrong. Even the new, even the economist, one of the propagator of the capitalist production structure, that is Keynes, one of the finest economists of the 20th century. he argued that there is nothing wrong when the economy is in trouble, the government's intervention and the spending of the government. So that is all legitimizes the importance of the government when it comes to development or growth, or the performance of the macroeconomic stability, etc. So this is the whole idea which we have to keep in mind. And being a person who is interested that especially the importance of the state and government in the development, and moving away from the trajectory of what you call the poorer position when you compare with the international economies. So India has to basically have spent, and therefore the GSDP, this 3% ratio is not actually a very good one. When the economy, now this period is very important period also, because from 1991 to 2020, that is over the last 20 30 years, what is the most striking thing is India is growing at a fairly good rate. So the deficit of 4% is far below than actually the real economy's growth rate during this last 30 years. So in my mind, the worry is in fact a very, it's in a fragile ground. At the same time, if the government is not actually spending, I'll come back to this point very clear. If the government is not spending good enough in the field of developmental expenditures, then that is going to be reflective in the whole economy. So I'll come to all this classification in a while. Now this is what is actually the rough positions of the GSDP and the deficit ratio in all the states combined. Okay, and now all this period has to be dissected, and then we will see that what is actually the condition. So fiscal indicators of state combined as a percentage of GDP is given as in 5 period, especially when you have an average of 1991 to 96 97, you have an average of 97 98 to 2002 3, just before the FRBM, and then you have an average of 2003 to 4 to 8 9, just before the or during the the crisis, the international basically housing bubble burst in the United States. So then you have a period which is 2009-10 to 14, where again state has started increasing. Then it's spending. Then you have a period which is the current period, which is 14-15 to 18-19, where the data is available. Till the point that the data is available. So this is actually the revenue deficit. Now within that period, revenue deficit in the first category was 8%, then the second category 2.5%, and the third period to 0.4%. Remember, the revenue deficit was 0.4% even before the FRBM was implemented. Now during the FRBM period, it was gone to 0.5, but after again 2014-15 FRBM, even the existence of the FRBM is not able to basically reduce the revenue deficit to 0% target, because it has gone to 0.7%. So the rule-based, the effectiveness of the rule-based fiscal responsibility or the is under question in this context also, because you have a post pre-FRBM, that is during 1991 to 96-97, your revenue deficit was roughly 0.8%, and in 2000, that is into 2018-19, 14-15 to 18-19 of the last 5 years of the current period, that is it is 0.8. So again, this is actually, I would like to comment a little bit on this aspect later. Again, now the same is been very vivid from the fiscal deficit point also. See, during the 1991-96, it was say 2.9%, roughly 3%, as I said. Then that has increased to 4.2% only in 2000. 98 2003 period, where the international economy had a turbulence, that is the trading partners and the Indian economy's partners across the world had problem. Now then again, when you come to the second part, it was brought out to, that is during this period, 2.8%, and again it's continued 2.4%, fairly it was 2.4%, and then 2.9% now. So see, even from FRBM to this period, we have actually 2.8%, 2.9% in average, which was less than 3%, but of the state. But that was even the condition before actually this 1991. And then you have also possibility, when you opened up, there is a lot of possibility had been opened to the state to manage fund from outside and actually spend. So many issues are there. I will come to that subsequently. Now again, if you look into the primary deficit aspect, 1%, and now still we are actually at that level. Only during this 3 4 to 8% you are able to reduce it to less than 1%. So now if you look into the other aspects of the fiscal indicator, like debt indicators, outstanding debt into 1991 92 to 96 97, it was 23.1%, and that was increased to 28%, and that is again increased to 34%, 31.7%, and which was actually reduced to the older stage of 24.6%, and now it is 24. So that means the outstanding debt, unlike it is actually over a period, it is quite clear that unless the turbulent period, the indicator, that is the debt indicator, is almost stable. So again, this is with or without the Fiscal Prudence Act. This is what the whole point which I would like to make. And again, when you speak about the revenue indicator, the revenue receipts of 2000, the revenue receipts of the states combined was 12.5% in 1991-96 period. Then it is, see, look at the revenue receipt, it had almost the same pattern, unlike the revenue receipt had fallen during that turbulent period. That is why, when your revenue receipt had been fallen, then naturally your deficit will go up. So this is because your revenue had fallen, and that has an effect on yours on the other side. So revenue increasing mechanism has to be the kind of a key mechanism which will reduce your revenue deficit. So that is the only thing. Again, your on tax revenue 5.6% in 1991, which to the other period, and then the first period, and now your own tax revenue had a little bit slightly better, like 6%, 6.2, 6.5, and 6.3%. Now non-tax revenue is again, it's falling, in fact. So these are also have influence in the deficit. That is what I would like. Central transfer. Now look at the central transfer. Now the central transfer was actually very high, but now it has reduced to the states, all these years. That is in fact one of the reason, again, the states has actually had a deficit. Now if it is falling, then that is again causes due to this an increase in the central transfer. In that sense, again, when you look into the total expenditure indicator, it is naturally increasing, because every aspect of the spending is actually increases when you look into the growth aspect. So total expenditure increases from 16.5% to 17.4% in the crisis period, which I said, that is in the FRBM period. Then it is again a 16.3, because you had actually reduced a sort of an expenditure, but again it started increasing. This is in fact have an effect that is not going to actually reduce your deficit. Okay. Now, out of that, you have revenue expenditure as well as the capital expenditure. Look at the capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is almost like this, and I think we need to really worry about this aspect. Okay, and then developmental expenditure was reduced during the 97 and 2009 period, and again it started increasing 2000, where the government had a boost in developmental expenditure, and again that is increasing, and social expenditure same has a same trend in that sense. So this is what is actually roughly the idea of the expenditure. If we look into the gross fiscal deficit as a percentage of GSDP, then things are, you can be very interestingly understood. See, look at this different classification of period which we had, where the states, relative position in their fiscal deficit, that is GFD, that gross fiscal deficit, is been given. So in that there are certain state which has actually glaringly a state which is actually below the FRBM stipulation, and certain states which is having actually higher than the FRBM case. So that is we call based on this fiscal deficit indicator, normally we try to classify states in terms of high imbalance state as well as low imbalance state. So look at the state like Odisha, for example. See, before 1990, that is in the first phase, Odisha's fiscal deficit was almost like 4.35%. But after the FRBM implementation, this has brought down to 0.98 and 0.63, and now it is 2.26, which is again below the FRBM restriction. So now there are, for instance, states like Kerala, that is in the period which is this the FRBM period, which is actually having one of the high, Uttar Pradesh, then West Bengal, then state like Rajasthan, Kerala, etc. at all had actually higher spending in that terms. That their the spending is still higher than the average. But remember all this. See, in Kerala, you can see that before this thing, and during 97-98, the country had actually, the state had actually a spending which is a positive spending, 4.88%. Then it is 3.86, 3.84. Again, in the current period, it is 3.58%. Interestingly, it is the fiscal deficit is very high as far as the state is concerned. But you cannot, in fact, as a state, if you pick Kerala, and a state if you pick Odisha, which is having the lowest of such a case, or Maharashtra on the see the development indicators of these two states is completely different to that of the other. Again, the model states like Gujarat and all, they are trying to actually reduce the fiscal deficit at a lesser than the international. That is in the prudential rate of less than 3%. But can you really compare these states with that of the states where it is having a higher? This is a higher fiscal deficit, or people try to say that the high imbalance state. No, can you state that the performance of the state in the last couple of years, for instance, the state is having a very in the last couple of decades, in fact, the states ranked and performed well in the overall development indices of the states among the states. So then from the fiscal side, it is quite contrary, and the developmental side, it is quite the pictures are completely different to that of what we understood. So that has actually given birth to this classification, as I said, high imbalance state and the low imbalance state. So we there is a clear difference as well as a distinguishing characterization as well as a real discussion is necessary to understand this thing. For example, a high imbalance state like Bihar, Kerala, Punjab, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, and a low imbalance state like Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Haryana, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Orissa, Tamil Nadu, etc. Now, in that context, it is we will see that whether the high imbalance and low imbalance creates a sort of a consistency in understanding. Now, this is actually a graph which is immediately says that the gross fiscal deficit as a percentage of GSDP combined of the low imbalance state and the high imbalance states. See, look at the low imbalance states. As I said, the states like us, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Haryana, then Karnataka and Odisha. Now look at that thing. Low imbalance states, their fiscal deficit is actually 3%, or roughly 3%, and then it has gone up and then it's gone down since the FRBM implementation. And again in 2007-8 it has gone up, and then again it's fallen. Now it is slightly going up, and we are at the original position now. All right, so almost like in the average, if you take a trend line, you will see that actually we are almost in the same track over a period of 3%. We are in the 3% category, that is the low imbalance, whereas the high imbalance states have a range of over 4%. So this is what is, you can say, roughly 4% and roughly 3%. This is the difference between the high imbalance. There is a 1% GSDP in a difference if you simply calculate it in that sense. But look at the states which is having these states like Bihar, Kerala, Punjab, Rajasthan. The Kerala, Punjab are all ranks one of the highest developing state, highest indicator in the development indicator. These state in fact ranks quite or perform quite well, whereas you also have in same cohort like Bihar and Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal, where relatively their performance are not that great in that. So you have a mix of an imbalance in terms of fiscal prudence in that sense. So again, in the low imbalance case also, you have actually a result is mixed. Because for example, state like Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra and relatively Andhra Pradesh, they are better state in fact, consistency in performance. But at the same time, when you talk about the human development and all, they are consistently improving, but not actually as good as the other states, but on the Kerala or Punjab example. But on the contrary, you have also a poorer state here also, which is actually performing poorly, comparatively poor. So that in a nutshell say that it is basically not much to do with a simple understanding of a fiscal imbalance alone to speak something which is quite relevant. Same the case with the revenue deficit. See, in the case of revenue deficit, this state has a stability. High imbalance state is having a stable revenue deficit, 1% or less than 1% over a long period. But the low imbalance state is having a negative. That means a surplus in their revenue case. That is, they have a revenue surplus than the deficit. But most of the state is not very good performing state. So the state which is in fact having a revenue surplus is like the state like Orissa, for example. But the human development context as well as the prudence in that sense,
developmental spending, as far as the developmental spendings are concerned, Orissa is not a very greatly performing state in that sense. Then you have also Madhya Pradesh is in having a surplus in revenue. But I think this is a very serious thing. Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, they're all having, in fact, Andhra Pradesh. But when you discuss the fiscal the development indicators, these states are not very good state in that sense. Same in the case of revenue deficit. Bihar is actually, though it is comes under the high imbalance state, their they are having a revenue surplus, but at the same time the social sector is actually performing poorly in that state. So, what is actually all this trying to say? In that sense, I feel that there is a careful understanding which we have to have, even though we have a rule-based system, and it is state-specific also. See, it has its own federal nature because that is reflective in this very diagram, in the very data itself. Because if you look into the performance of the state vis-a-vis and the growth of the state, indeed, that is also very important. The growth as well as the performance of the state in terms of its development, its growth, then having a surplus in that sense makes no meaning here. But at the same time, I'm not saying that, I'm not discounting the fact that it is irrelevant. It is important, but however, we have to have a state-specific implication also, and you have to give a leeway, like a range where you can actually really do something which is makes you a better or a different state as far as these things. Kerala is in that sense a classic case where you have definitely a deficit, which is a positive deficit all through years. But you cannot say that actually Kerala is doing bad in that sense. Maybe fiscally they are doing bad in that sense of this typical quantitative and understanding, but not necessarily actually overall the state's performance in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of services sector, every aspect. If you look into it, most of the development aspect, if you look into it, they are doing much better than any other state in that sense. So we need to really have a very cautious evaluation of all this thing. Simply just jumping into the negative and positive, you can see. Many people say that as a critic, Kerala is having a remittance of the long remittance history. But again, I would say that that itself is a source and an opportunity. Then you have to really think that the state cannot go bankrupt. Even if it's people come back, they will find their own way in that sense. So the state is having a high standard, will maintain itself, or it aspires to maintain itself. So that means state specific characteristics has to consider when you implement a sort of a rule based fiscal prudence kind of thing. Otherwise, what happens is that you have a danda, that like you have actually a rule which penalizes even the best as well as the worst. So that is in fact create no sort of incentive to state. So I think these things has to be considered, and when we speak about the rule-based possibilities. Okay, and then that is what is my whole hunch about all these things. So again, when you look into the own tax revenue, the low imbalance states own tax revenue is lesser than the that the own tax revenue, own revenue of state is higher for low imbalance state. Okay, because they do have definitely a better own revenue than the tax revenue. Okay, whereas the high imbalance state is actually having lesser possibilities of own revenue. Okay, so this is a very very important one. But now 2017, this is almost like come close. That is, even the own revenue of the states has been fallen for the low imbalance state also. So that's what we we see that there is a change which is taking place in the case of many states like you know the many other states like even the low imbalance states. And when you come to the revenue expenditure side, this is all about your receipts and sorry, the deficit. And when you come to the revenue expenditure part of low and high imbalance state, things are a little bit interesting. That is, in the low imbalance state, their expenditure, revenue expenditure, is in fact almost stagnant, whereas the high imbalance state, their revenue expenditure is in fact increasing. Revenue expenditure is increasing over a long period. In that sense, if you look into the data, it's quite obvious. So these are actually the kind of situation which the states, the subnational level of data try to basically give us. And this is very important to understand the rule-based system. This is in continuation of the last lecture. That is, even if we have a rule-based system, that rule-based system has to have a range rather than in specific point in the nation as such. This is the most important thing as far as this whole understanding, because there are the state-specific characteristics may make the state to have a better or a worse performance in that. So based on that also you have to consider the how much the state can actually go for its deficiting. Otherwise what happens is that it will give other the states to explore the possibilities like the extra budgetary borrowings kind of thing. So definitely it will. And they have to survive, because if you have a development standard which is above than the national average, then you have to maintain it, and you are, or the people are expecting to maintain that sort of a standard. If in order to keep that sort of a standard, then definitely your spending has to be kept in the pace at least. Then and then only you can actually survive in the political economy scenario. Otherwise, the political parties been actually left out. So naturally, they will go for the extra budgetary provisions, and which will actually, in fact, have an effect which is having even a worse situation, an uncontrollable situation. And there are all possibilities which the states explore in such situations. So this is what we can see in the recent case of different discussions across the subnational level and national level. With this, let me conclude this session. Thank you very much, and thank you for your patient listening. So have a